stopped it. Hopefully you can.
Okay. Oh,
Oh, sorry. No, I'm sorry.
no, you're right. You're right. Let's do that one. And share. So how are we going there? Everyone can see that?
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, so before we start, if everyone could just make sure they can find the chat channel so we can have a little bit of interactivity during the presentation, because it can get awfully lonely doing these things online. If you can just give me a wave or a thumbs up or something to just let me know you're there, that'd be great. Fantastic. Thanks, Sadia. Lovely. All right. So, thanks, Ahmed, for the introduction. Yes, I am Heather Cox. I'm actually in Australia, not the US, and I'm the Enterprise Analytics Lead at the RAA, which involves administration of our on-premise Tableau server, supporting our Tableau creators in their ongoing learning, championing best practices, and creating a Tableau workbook or two. Outside of work, I'm still a data nerd, often working on Tableau public projects, which has improved my viz building skills much faster than anything else I've done, although I'm much slower at learning to choose less ambitious projects. But like you, I want to create work that makes an impact on the viewer. And one of the first things we learn about effective data communication is that there's a strong design component. When we talk about good dashboard design, we generally focus on the visual aspects and their impact on readability. We choose chart types, colors, font sizes, and other elements to ensure that users understand the message as quickly and accurately as possible. And if it doesn't get in the way, we'll add some wow factor. But we often neglect user experience, which starts as soon as they click the link. If it takes too long to load, users might not wait around to get the whole story, might not wait for that insightful tooltip to load, might not interact with those filters. As beautiful as your workbook might be, it doesn't communicate without an audience willing to stick around to take in the information. So to make sure your viz reaches your audience, I'm going to share some guidance for optimization using examples from my own experience. We'll look at what makes a workbook inefficient, examine the impacts of small choices you're making every day, and I'll reveal some tips you can apply straight away to improve the user experience of your workbooks. An efficient workbook will meet the performance expectations of the user. Now, that doesn't really sound that exciting, but when the workbook doesn't meet the expectations of the user, when it loads slowly or the filtering takes too long, that's when performance interferes with the impact. A workbook that loads too slowly risks users not drilling down, making assumptions rather than verifying, or not even opening it at all. And not everybody in your organization is as excited about Tableau as we are. If users have a bad experience with one workbook, particularly one they use frequently, they may form a negative opinion about Tableau in general and avoid using it altogether, relying on spreadsheets or gut feel and influencing others to do the same. Different users have different expectations. Your CEO likely wants fast, high-level information, where somebody who's drilling down into ever more highly filtered data is more likely to expect a load delay. It's your job, and not an easy one, to predict audience expectations and design a workbook to operate within that technical budget. Users who interact with a workbook performing within the technical budget are more likely to take in the message, to come back, to interact, ask deeper questions, and find those hidden insights. They put more trust in Tableau in general and have a positive experience, and it's more likely that positive experience that they have is going to have an influence on others' opinions as well. Now, that was not just a clever GIF that we were running there. That is an actual recording from a workbook, from this workbook. Now, here we go. So it's not the worst workbook in the world. It's just a tribute. It's an obscured representation of a report from our server and a cautionary tale for efficient workbook design. It was one of the first reports created by our organisation before we even had an analytics department, workbook standards or guidelines. Over time, multiple amendments and additions have contributed to becoming slower and slower. It tracked a key business metric, but people avoided using it. One of our departments even developed a monthly process to extract key numbers from the workbook, put them into a spreadsheet, which was then distributed to senior leadership. We noted a performance issue and made some changes to improve the user experience, but it was still a relatively poor performer and had developed a bad reputation. We now realise that almost every aspect of the workbook was unoptimised. It was the opposite of optimised. It was the poster child for every one of the tips we're going to look at today. So a new workbook starts with connecting to a data source. And as soon as we select the data source type, our choices start affecting workbook performance. The major factors will be the amount of data we're bringing in and the connection type. It's important to understand the drawbacks of live connections to data sources in order to judge whether they're offset by benefits in your use case. Live connections are queried by Tableau at runtime, that is, when the user accesses your workbook. If you are connecting to a published data source, a live connection will make sense. But otherwise, Tableau is performing your SQL query or accessing your spreadsheet, pulling all the data and then rendering the visualization while your user waits. An extract means that the query has been run in advance, and better yet, Tableau will optimize the extract based on your workbook, improving the user experience. Large extracts have their own pitfalls. Calculations within the workbook will take longer when there's more data, affecting load times, but those extracts must also be stored on the server and they have to be refreshed, which takes time, which delays the next extract refresh in the queue, which can result in refresh schedules that run for many hours, potentially leaving workbooks with stale data for part of the workday. So what can we do? Starting with the obvious, live or extract, we need to figure out what data is really needed. Limit your historical data to what users are likely to refer to. It's probably not more than 3 years. Extract filters can help you control the amount of data based on the fields in the data source. If you only want 3 years worth of data, you select the date field and provide the range. Data source filters can be applied in a similar way, but work by filtering the data after Tableau has requested it from the data source. They may provide some performance gains, particularly for live connections where extract filtering isn't available, but try extract filters first where possible. And if your users are only interested in high-level aggregation like monthly sales totals, bringing in transaction-level data means Tableau has to do the work of querying it, then do the work of aggregating it when it could all be done in the data source. While Tableau can manage a lot of data preparation tasks, best practice is to do it in the data source. Of course, it's likely that your understanding of the data needs will shift as you work, and you'll need to revisit the data preparation multiple times. So be sure to look for optimization opportunities in the data connections once the workbook has been through testing. For instance, if you have views built on your data server to provide clean data at the correct level of granularity for your workbook, it will result in better performance, but perhaps leave it till the end. If you're using a SQL Server connection, it is more efficient to use tables or views, but sometimes you have to use custom SQL queries. They're very flexible during development, but once you finalize the data, you can optimize the connection with a custom SQL, with the initial SQL rather. Using the initial SQL tab on the connection window, you can create a temp table, and then your custom SQL can just select the results from the temp table. This is more efficient than custom SQL in isolation, as Tableau doesn't wrap the initial SQL in more code, which is particularly useful for live connections, as Tableau may otherwise run custom SQL queries multiple times at runtime. Often we need to combine multiple data sources, and different methods perform differently. Sometimes you have no choice but to use blends, like when you're using a published data source. A blend only works in some calculation types, and blends are not optimized for performance in the way relationships are. Personally, I avoid blends wherever possible, and it's the main reason I will avoid published data sources. Joins create a data extract that performs more efficiently than blends, but will duplicate rows from one data source if joined to multiple rows in a data source of different granularity, resulting in a data set that's larger than the originals combined. There are situations where this is the best way of combining your data sources, but for most situations, relationships will give the best results as they keep the data tables separate. So there's less data replication. It means a smaller data set, which is more easily optimized by Tableau, and we reduce inefficient calculations and aggregations that we use, that we create to deal with granularity problems later on. So our dashboard uses a live connection to a published data source, which is then blended with a custom SQL query that has no initial SQL. It pulls in about 5 years worth of data, and while there are some rolling 12-month charts, most users only look at charts showing the latest month. The data is also at the transaction level, so there are a lot of rows being blended together at runtime. It's kind of breaking the rules already, but this is just the beginning. Once the data is connected, we can start building charts, which often starts with trying out things to find insights, what Kat Greenbrook calls chart vomit. But once we've decided on the charts we want in our finished workbook, we need to consider the performance impacts of our design decisions. Choosing the right chart isn't just about visual appeal. Charts can show multiple related dimensions and potentially replace 2 or more different charts, reducing dashboard load time. Showing high-level insights in your main charts and providing related information through interactive elements can reduce the number of charts as well. Drill down options and charts in tooltips give users more information on demand at a fraction of the performance cost of putting another chart on the dashboard, because Tableau doesn't try to preload them when the workbook opens, but can quickly load a single chart as required. A very small delay for a limited number of users in a specific circumstance in exchange for a reduced workbook load time for all users. The number of marks at the bottom left-hand corner of your view is a good indication of how hard Tableau is working to display your chart. If that number blows out, you can expect to take a performance hit as well. And look, sometimes the right chart isn't a chart at all. Bands communicate effectively, quickly, and are extremely efficient performance-wise because they're just one mark. We can improve the performance of individual charts when we understand the aggregation options and how the data granularity impacts the calculation. And this is also where the duplication that results from joins instead of relationships starts to matter. So here's a question for you. Who of you has been confused by the result of dragging a count into a sheet? You drag count in and the number that comes up completely baffles you. Anyone have that problem? For those who have, you'll find that the way that you usually get around it is to drag count distinct on instead. The issue with doing that is twofold. The reason that count gives a weird result is often because the granularity is not what you expected. Rows are being duplicated, often by the way that multiple data sources are connected. And then when you count them, you get every row, not just the unique ones from the original data source. There's extra data, and that can slow things down. But using count distinct goes and makes a bad situation worse by checking each row against every row already counted on a bigger data set. And if you haven't really been sure why these discrepancies happen from time to time, you might be in the habit of using count distinct by default, just to avoid any nasty surprises. Where possible, combine your data sources with care. Use count and save count distinct for those situations where nothing else will do the job. The other aggregation to use with caution is ATTR, or the attribute. I know it's the aggregation option that we use when Tableau complains that we need an aggregate, and we get confused because there's only one possible value. Why does it want an aggregate? It's also the default aggregation that gets used for tooltips. But when we use ATTR, Tableau calculates a min and then a max to check that the two values are the same, and then it will return a value. If those two values are not the same, that's where you get the asterisk. If we know that there's only one possible value, choosing min or max will be a faster calculation because it only has to do one calculation. Average obviously is more expensive than min, max, or attribute, so it's best saved for situations where you really need the average. So our dashboard has a lot of closely related charts crammed into the space, some of which could be combined to enhance the workbook efficiency and reduce the crowding. With the data so granular, there's a lot of count distinct being used in the charts, but even more of that ATTR, as you can see here, because there's just so much being dragged onto that tooltip, and it's having to do all of those calculations. So the same logic about the aggregation options applies to calculated fields. But this is an area with a much wider scope for performance improvements. Calculated fields do a lot of the heavy lifting when we're building workbooks, particularly if we've not been able to get the data set into quite the right shape to begin with, or we're looking at multiple cross sections of the same data. After the data, calculated fields are the most likely cause of poor performance. Tableau will optimize data extracts for your calculations, and you can choose to pre-calculate some of your calculated fields with the materialize calculations option to limit the amount of work being done at runtime while the user is waiting. But those features are designed to complement rather than replace well-formed calculations. My co-workers will tell you how much I love a good level of detail calculation. They can be immensely powerful, but it is not free. One or two will generally perform quite well, but the more you add into your workbook, the greater the effect on performance. Materializing calculations can help, but if you're needing a lot of LODs, it may be a sign that the data preparation needs some work. Those with a programming background will recognize commenting code as best practice, and Tableau calculations should be no different. You can add comments into calculations directly with the / for a single line comment, or the *** for multi-line comments. These are great for explaining the code, but you can also add a high-level description of what the field is for. The comments option in default properties allows you to add a description that you can see when you hover over the field in the data menu. You can add it to any field, but it's particularly useful for calculated fields so that you can see straight away what that field is doing and hopefully prevent you reproducing identical calculations. There's a balance to be found between the length and the number of calculations used in a workbook. Creating short calculations to be used in other channels can be the most efficient way, particularly if those calculations are being used by multiple other calculations. But this can quickly become difficult to follow, and unfortunately, Tableau can suffer from many of the same problems we do. Likewise, if you try to manage this complexity by putting it all into one long calculation, it can result in code that's inefficient, as well as hard to understand. The sweet spot lies somewhere in the middle. Calculated fields that are comparing strings are more expensive than other calculations. So consider comparing unique numeric codes instead of strings if you have the option. If you're using calculations to group items, case statements will actually outperform an if-else-if statement, whether you're comparing strings or any other data type, and even outperforms Tableau's native group and set functions. There's not a lot that you need to do with an if statement that if you're working with strings that you can't do with a case statement. So definitely worth a shot. And while we're comparing things, the in operator is more efficient than a chain of or statements. So what do we find in our dashboard? This is a mocked up calculation from the escape room on my Tableau public profile, not the real dashboard. But the real dashboard features so many if statements looking like this, with chained or statements and string comparisons to create groupings that should ideally have been done in the data source. And a lot of count distinct is being used in these calculations, just in case the granularity issues pop up. We've all heard the phrase less is more, and it's definitely true of data visualization. It's a common mistake to build dashboards that show everything on one page, but each chart competes for attention, so any insights may simply get missed. One of the most frequently ignored design elements is also one of the most effective: white space. By using fewer charts and giving them plenty of space on the dashboard, they communicate more effectively with users. And fewer charts simply means less for Tableau to load, so it's faster as well. The exception is when fewer charts per dashboard just means more dashboards. You may have noticed the tick box for Publish Views as tabs. Tab views became a point of contention in our organisation when a couple of authors developed a preference for the cleaner look of turning off the tabs and using navigation buttons instead. But it created a number of issues with permissions on the server, which is why Tableau's recommendation is to always use tab views, which did make me question why turning them off was even an option. But I've since learned that when tab views are enabled, Tableau loads the visible portions of every single view in the workbook upon opening the link. If you can cut down the number of dashboards in your workbook, this will help keep your load times down. Grouping related dashboards into smaller specialized workbooks is another option. But if you can't split up or reduce the number of dashboards in your workbook, perhaps consider turning off tab views when publishing. One of the great strengths of Tableau is the interactivity of dashboards, and it can help us improve dashboard performance, or it can let us create monsters. Filters are convenient and very user-friendly, but too many will make the workbook slower to load, particularly if they're applied to multiple dashboards. Using the only relevant values option for filters, while great for users, provides additional work for Tableau and can impact performance as well. I'm not saying you shouldn't use them. Narrowing a date filter by default to show only the last month's data is an example of where using a filter will drastically improve load times. It pays to know how filters affect performance, positively or negatively, and understand the possible alternatives. Parameters can be an efficient substitute for filters, where only a single option is being selected at a time, because it prevents additional queries being run. You can also design your workbook to use dashboard actions so that interacting with elements on one chart will filter the data in other charts, and it's automatically filtered for relevant values. Users may need some hints on how to use them though, like labels, icons, or overlays, but these generally have less impact on performance than a filter showing only relevant values, representing a net gain in efficiency and potentially a more aesthetically pleasing option as well. Dynamic zone visibility is another of my favorite Tableau features and allows you to show or hide dashboard elements based on a Boolean value, allowing you to hide charts until they become relevant. Combine that with clever use of containers and you can create an efficient adaptive dashboard that displays charts based on the data and the user's needs. So I've already discussed how charts are being packed into that first dashboard on our workbook. And let me tell you, it doesn't get much better further in. Have a guess how many dashboards are in this particular workbook. Anybody want to throw some guesses into the chat there? So our magic number is 11, and tab views is on. So Tableau has to load every chart that's been shoehorned into those 11 dashboards at once. Oh, and let's not forget, some of this was built before dynamic zone visibility, so it utilizes sheet swappers. So there's actually even more charts being loaded than there is space to display them. But those filters are probably causing most of the trouble of the dashboard. Being applied to every view in the dashboard, they're slowing down the workbook load time considerably. So how do we know what to fix? Performance can be difficult to measure, and the impact of so many of the tips shared here depends heavily on the unique combination of requirements, users, and data. But we're data people, and Tableau knows that. So you'll find the dashboard recorder in the help menu. You can use this to monitor the performance of a dashboard, and it will produce a workbook to display the results and guide you towards areas in your workbook that are performing poorly. You can then optimize those areas based on what you've learned and use the dashboard recorder again to measure the improvement. So I've set the recorder going. We'll have a look at what happens when we interact with this particular workbook so that we've reference material for our performance workbook to show us. And then we'll just go and turn it off and have a look at what it provides us. So once the workbook recording stops, the new workbook will just open. And give us a rundown of the different actions that the work is doing and how much time they're taking. So that when you run it again, you've got something to compare against. Oops, we've gone too far. All right, but if you're feeling like you're not going to remember all of this stuff, Tableau has also got the basics covered for you with the Workbook Optimizer. And it is going to play, isn't it? There we go. All right. So it's sitting there in the server menu and it evaluates your performance, or evaluates your workbook rather, against best practices and highlights areas to address, complete with advice on what to do. Sometimes it might recommend removing a parameter or hiding a field that's needed, so it pays to check, but it generally provides pretty sound advice. Come on in. It's going to give us the next work now, isn't it? Come on. Thank you. Okay, so for more guidance, I recently found this performance optimization flowchart, which I can see being really helpful, and I'll share that the link to that one in the chat in a moment. The inspiration for this presentation is the Tableau white paper, Designing Efficient Production Dashboards. I would encourage you all to check it out for more tips and further explanation on what we've been through today. But at 80 pages, it's not the most accessible read. So I did want to pass on some of the gems that had been found within, like less is more. Less data, fewer calculations, fewer charts, fewer filters, fewer dashboards. Giving Tableau less to do means better performance. Work smarter, not harder. Using the most efficient aggregation or operation for the job is a no-brainer, provided you know what it is. Using case statements for groups and instead of if statements, min or max aggregations instead of ATTR, and count instead of count distinct where possible were some simple yet powerful changes we covered. Quick hide! If Tableau can't see it to begin with, then it doesn't affect the load time. Make use of functions like dynamic zone visibility and dashboard actions that hide complexity from Tableau at runtime. And start simple. If you're just taking your first steps into optimizing your workbooks, and this whole thing's been a bit of information overload for you, start with the Workbook Optimizer and let Tableau give you a guide. All right, so thank you, everybody. I'm keen to hear the questions that you might have. Harshid has a question here. Does sheet swapping affect performance? If so, what could be some alternatives to that since it's highly used? So what will happen with the sheet swapper is it doesn't show anything because it has evaluated that those calculations come to nothing, basically, because there's a null. But it's usually controlled by a calculated field, which it has to calculate before it decides not to show anything there. And so there is a cost to that. If you have the option, and I can't remember exactly which version of Tableau it is. I think it's 2023.1. Maybe someone can check that for me. Is where we got dynamic zone visibility, and that one's great because it's 2022.4. Thank you. So that allows us to just turn that that sheet off. It's not being calculated or shown at all because this Boolean value isn't being evaluated or has been evaluated to be false. It needs to be something that is true or false for the entire workbook in order to work. So that's where the parameters make it much easier, and parameters, evaluating those parameters is really quick and easy for Tableau to do, so you don't run into quite so many performance issues. So yes, dynamic zone visibility is absolutely magic. Okay, so there's a Q&A there as well. How does the Workbook Optimizer impact workbook size? That is a situation highly dependent on your data and what your what things are coming up in the Workbook Optimizer. So it's a tricky question to ask. Sometimes it's not going to reduce the size very much at all. It's about optimizing the performance, and that's probably the most that's probably the usual use case that comes out of it. It can involve reducing the workbook size, but for the most part, it's going to be about performance. That workbook size, it's not going to make it worse. The workbook size is most likely going to be impacted by the amount of data that you're bringing in, and how the relationships and joins between the data are happening. So that's where you're probably going to have the saving. Sujan, what is the optimal data size row count we can use in the live connections? That I do not know the answer to, I'm afraid. I think that the performance would depend very much on the amount of data that you're bringing in, as well as sort of the speed of the connection, what kind of a connection it is. If you're going to SQL, it might be different than connecting to, say, an Excel spreadsheet, depending, the network connections and the network performance, whether or not you're over a VPN, over wireless, over fiber, those kinds of things. There would be a lot of situations that could provide you with a few extra variables. So what I would be suggesting is test it out.
Thank you so much, Heather.
Not a problem. So I'll pop those links in the chat, and and we can hopefully all get some benefit out of those. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. This is very comprehensive performance tips. So you covered a lot with the live or extract, going down with the calculations. So many things I had seen so far. Very, very useful. Really appreciate your time and help for sharing those.
Thank you.
No problem. So next we have Sadia. She's going to speak about the map layers to minimalistic design. So Sadia, over to you.
Hi everybody. Am I echoing or is it fine? Yeah, okay. So, just a second. Yeah. So, I'm talking about map layers and I'm keeping it really simple because I feel like map layers has so many dimensions to it. But I'm just gonna walk you over my whiz and how I created this using map layers. Yeah. So what we're looking at today would be about me because this is, I think, my first time presenting something. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Then what are map layers? A really quick description of that. Just have a quick look at the data. How I prep the icons, the shapes in PowerPoint. Quickly build that, and then talk a little bit about the design aspect of it. Okay. I clearly need a new headshot, but yeah, I've been busy. So, a little bit about me. I am a data visualization expert at Advanced Analytics, COE in Emirates NBD, which is a bank in Dubai. I have a bachelor's in electronics and communication engineering, and I started my journey with Tableau in 2021. um, One thing I really like to add about my Tableau journey in that it started off was I really learned a lot about Tableau through the community, through the ambassadors. I work with some fantastic ambassadors and visionaries who have really I'm shameless, so I ask a lot of questions, and that's really helped me in gaining the knowledge that I have in Tableau. And I really recommend reaching out to the data fam in case anyone wants to learn more. And definitely Tableau Public books. I love downloading these workbooks and reverse engineering them, which is what I used to do a lot. Um, some fun facts I feel which fun. I am a mom to three kids, and I love ice skating in the desert. Um, so what are map layers? Tableau released map layers in 2020.4 release. This basically allows you to overlay multiple marks, layers on a map with no hard limit to the number of layers that can be used. Previously, we used dual axis maps. It was previously possible to just add two layers into a map and then just dual axes. And this was the technique that was used. But now, sky's the limit. You can add so many layers to this, and just adding to a point that everything happens on one worksheet instead of creating so many sheets. And that's basically going to reduce, workbook performance. But now, when you have map layers, you can build KPI cards and everything based off one worksheet. But I think it does depend on how you structure the data and how you go about doing this. So I'm just going to quickly dive in to the data and show you what we're looking at. So this is just animal rights. It's a data set that was Makeover Monday, one of the Makeover Monday challenges. And I'm just looking at these columns here, country, and I'm looking at recognition of animal sentience, suffering, laws against animal cruelty, support, and for farming. So these are basically yes or no, and they'll be colored according to yes, no, or partial. We do have other measures here as well. on a hover over section. Then we have the total score, that is the animal rights data, I mean animal score index. And then I just added a rank for that based off the total score for each country. Heading in, I'm gonna now share how I created those icons. um, this is a whiz. Let me just show you. This is the whiz that we're looking at. So these shapes, you can create it on Figma, Adobe, or PowerPoint. I think PowerPoint is the OG, and I want to keep it simple. So I'm just gonna show you how to do it in PowerPoint. So if you can see, this is the shape. So what we're going to do is save all these shapes into our Tableau repository in the shape folder. So what's happening here is I this is the final shape, but it goes off going to be corner 4, corner 3, corner 2, and corner 1 with the center in the middle. So what we're going to do is first select all of these and go in, and we make sure that we choose no fill. Don't choose white, just no fill. And then we go ahead and save that as a picture, and you go into basically your documents, and then your Tableau repository, and into shapes. And I created a folder, um, just right here, rectangles. And as you can see, I have created that. You can see rectangle 4, and then you can see rectangle 3 happening, 2, 1, etc. And all of this is happening with you choosing those shapes that you want to have no fill on. The whole thing is that you need to be doing that so that you can see the icons populate when you choose it. Yeah. Once that's done and all of your shapes are saved onto the Tableau repository, we can go ahead and start building this whiz. So basically, I'm using Tableau Public Desktop for this, and this whiz just has one sheet going in. So we can see that there are few calculations that have been used, and I'm just going to build it right in front of you. If anyone has questions, please drop them. I think I'm a bit too fast, but if you do have any questions, do ask me and stop me in between. Yes? Okay. Um, Going ahead. So, map layers is all about layers of map upon each other. So, we're going to start off with adding this onto thing over here, right here. And this calculation here that we're creating for the four corners and the center, we can see is make point 0 comma 0. So this is nothing but giving the x and y coordinate for each of the shapes that we're going to be putting in. As you can see, as soon as I've put in one of the calculations, I'm just going to remove that and put in this one. Just let me just look at it. Yeah, as soon as you put that in, you have the map that's coming up. You go ahead and turn off everything. Just turn off, giving you a blank canvas. There we go. And then we go ahead and add the other layers that we want to do, simultaneously putting country there. Corner 4, um, country, corner 3. Okay. Since we are just going to have a few countries, I'm going to just put that. First of all, we're going to split this. So I'm using something that is two calculations that we use, which is called small multiple. I call it small multiple magic. I really, really, really like using small multiples because it really allows me to, see all of it in just one sheet instead of having like so many sheets. It's just easier and it's so much more flexible. So I will drop a link of Flage Twins blog post on one of these small multiples, which is great, and y'all can use it as well. So if you just want to have a look at the calculation, it's here, but I feel like if you go ahead with reading the blog post, you will understand it much better. So we're going to compute using country. Again, compute using country here. And I'm just going to be using first world countries. So quickly just gonna select this, bear with me. Okay. Now the country center, we can just go ahead and everything is a shape. So we go at shapes, more shapes, we reload the shapes, go into the folder that we've saved in, selecting this, apply, go ahead, increase the size, and that's our first map layer happening there. Turn off the tooltips. Um, Now here, I'm going to use something called a blank shape. We can create the blank shape pretty simple. All you got to do is insert any shape. And I'll tell you why blank shapes are so cool, because they don't give you that ugly highlight that you get hovering over a circle shape. And it's just much easier. So you just select that, and again you do the same thing. You're just going to save this as a picture in again to your shapes folder. I have a folder called blank and I have two there already. I do not need so many, but you can just save it here and then use it so that when you're hovering over, you do not see any highlight. Heading back. So I'm going to be putting a blank shape here just so that I can put in some text. There we go. Size again blank. So the corner 4 is again a shape. So now basically we're just putting in all the shapes in their places. So now we basically have everything in place, and we're gonna be coloring the corners based off. You can start off with animal suffering, put that in there, attribute it, then go ahead with the other corner. I think this one was suffering. Oh god, sentience here. Then So that's almost done. We can just sort this by the rank. Yeah. And then we're just going to go ahead and put in the country labels right there. And we're also going to add rank. I also created an index grade, which is basically just segregating the total score into A, B, C, D, giving it a grade. So I'm going to be adding that in as well. Yeah, there. And I'm just going to copy um, the way I've done it here in the previous sheet. Just a second. Oops. Well, basically from here we're just editing. But if you want to skip that part, we can just skip it. And this is the finished outlook of it. And then we can just go ahead and put it on our dashboard. And what I'd like to add now, if I just want to talk about the design of this, it would be this was an inspiration that I saw on PowerPoint, and I thought, I could use this as well and use map layers on this. And it's important to have like a good title. And I also really like something that I've learned to do is adding the legend within the title that I'm speaking about. I've also added a how to for this chart here, and I've used Figma to do this. And I think it's really important to have some kind of how to when you're using charts that are not conventional. And especially this chart that I've made is very different, and I feel that without a how to. Apart from that, talking about the design, I like to keep it really minimalistic, and my design sense comes from a lot of whizzing and seeing people and trying to copy from them and trying to learn from them, and then and having a little bit of color. And I like white, and as Heather said, white space is so important, and I really like to use that in all of my whizzes. Apart from that, I think we're done. So if you guys have any questions, do let me know. Thank you. I hope that was it.
That was quite
Yeah.
doing
Yeah, I
I
would
hope
say.
it wasn't that fast. I was like pretty fast, but yeah, it was simple. I hope.
Why don't you
absolutely.
try Iron Wiz, Sadia?
Yeah, like I was practicing in the morning, and I was like, I
Yeah,
should.
so I really feel like I'm on Iron Wizards, and generally the people will do in the similar way like you does. So, but yeah, it's very really good and a lot of good feedback or comments while you are doing that particular dashboard. So it's really good and informative, like how we use the map layers in that way. So very helpful. Let me check if we have any
I
questions.
think more people are going to get back.
Sorry.
It's echoing like hell. Uh,
uh, Sorry, go ahead. Prasan. And, Prasan was saying more people may get back on the design, like how you did this, something like that. So,
Mm-mm.
mhm.
Yeah, but I hope that
uh,
was. I hope you guys were able to follow along, and I hope I.
yeah. And I think there's a question from Heather. How do you manage the size of your items with the map layers? And I find the sizing
Uh,
changes between the view and the dashboard. It's in the chat.
I can't see. How do you manage the size changes the dashboard? I usually it really depends. Like I just eyeball it mostly, but I always keep it like to the max of it. And it also depends, like, the sizing really depends when you are creating the shape on PowerPoint as well. So if you have like a Figma or something you're using that way, you can create a bigger shape, and that would basically help you understand the sizing of it when you load it as a shape into Tableau. So I did have realized I had to increase the shapes when I had to save it again. So that was a bit of trial error process for me. Thanks, Pratik.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I really like to see that.
Okay, I think with that, in thanks to Heather and Sadia for presenting the amazing sessions, focusing on the performance tuning tape, which was really helpful, and also on the map layers. So this is really cool. So with that, I think we're coming to an end. And Prasanna, would you like to add anything? And Anshula?
I'm echoing like hell. Won't speak
Okay,
much.
okay.
Yeah, I
Then
think it was an amazing session. I really enjoyed it thoroughly. And I hope you guys can join our WhatsApp channel. We shared the QR initially. Please do, because we are going to come with a lot of great sessions, and I think it's going to benefit us also. Please tune into Tableau Buddy, and if you have something to share, any interesting topics, please contact me, Prasan, Vani, or Avinash, and we'll have you on board and get you on a speaker list as well.
yeah, thanks, Anshula. Yeah, we are always looking for the speakers. So maybe if anyone on the meeting would like to speak in our upcoming session, so feel free to reach out to us as well. So yeah, I think with that we can stop the recording and maybe call out the session. So again, thank you very much to Heather and Sadia for presenting, and thanks everyone for joining the sessions. We are looking forward to see you in the next session. Thank you and have a nice
See you later.
yeah, bye.
Thank you, guys. Bye.